Hi everyone, thank you for coming. I assume it's a great impression to be a part of the first global Magento event in New York since the COVID lockdown. I have a feeling like it was not 2 or 3 years ago, but in my previous life at all. However, 2022 brought a war to my homeland, which is Ukraine, so I cannot see you in person. However, we'll talk with you virtually. Few words about me. I'm lead developer at vConnect agency, member of Magento community maintainers team, and I was involved into creating Magento 2 in-store pickup feature. Let's proceed to the main topic itself. If someone asked me 3 or 4 years ago which Magento frontend to choose, my reaction would be, what? What are you talking about? But And for those moment of time, it was a normal reaction, because the only option was Luma. There was no innovative choice. The only way was just to take default Magento frontend theme and customize it for your needs, or buy some custom themes which is hard to support and maintain. Nowadays we have a variety of options. First, PVA solutions as a full Loom alternative have been started in far 2018, and they are becoming more and more popular, especially due to PVA hype. So now the question which of them to choose is quite actual. However, I will not give you an answer. There is no silver bullet. Everything depends on your project needs. To answer this question, it's required to have a vision and understanding what is each option about and what is the difference. And these points are exactly the ones I am going to share. For that purpose, I did not analyze all the solutions. Instead, I did it for four types of approaches with a single example for each. They are LumaSim or Luma-based solution, HuvaSim, custom frontend based on Magento monoliths, Vue Storefront, which is a standalone PVA, and Magento PVA Studio, PVA for Magento. There are 7 criteria for comparison. They are price, it's the most obvious one. It would be mentioned if it's publicly available and omitted when not or the option is free. Additional hosting requirements. Some options have specific requirements for deployment and server infrastructure. The complexity of development. That's a tricky point that cannot be measured numerically and depends on many subjective factors such as development team skills and experience of certain specialists and their feedback. All the front-end types have different requirements for the development team involved because of different technologies and tools they utilize. Supportability and upgradability. It's about complexity for upgrading the front-end solutions as well as maintaining them. And Google PageSpeed score and Lighthouse scores, just basic performance SEO and best practices metrics. Third-party extension support. If you prefer purchasing third-party extensions instead of developing custom ones for your business needs, this point that must be considered. The first one is Luma. To be short, that's a very default Magento frontend and theme that comes out of the box with the Magento application. The page content itself is being composed using PHP templates and layout XML directives that, to be fair, are quite good. But its frontend framework is quite archaic and it's built on such frontend libraries as jQuery, Knockout.js, and Require.js. 99.9% of Magento frontend developers are experienced in the Luma theme, so such specialists are quite common and obviously familiar with the Magento itself, so that's a strong side. At the same time, it's not easy to find a professional who would be good at Knockout.js with Magento, and even in such case, spending about 6 hours for simple checkout customization like adding some button on checkout, for example, is real, because the framework is overcomplicated. That was the first strongest side of Luma. And the second one is support by third-party extension providers and extensibility. Every extension from Magento Marketplace is developed and tested for and on Luma, which provides the possibility to save investments on custom development or functionality that might be covered by them. However, the coin has its negative side. Simply saying, despite there are enough ways for extending in a right and safe way, it's not rare when the customization is reached by overwriting the components of the Luma theme or the extensions or the theme items that are already rewritten by the third-party vendors. So you must rewrite items that is already rewritten. That means that this approach makes them dependent and sensitive to backward incompatible changes. So as a result, the more third-party extensions you install and customize, or just adjust to fit the design, the more difficult it would be to upgrade them and Magento itself. For large and heavily customized stores, up to 40% of the Magento upgrade time is being spent on updating the front end. Even the design remains the same visually. The second major disadvantage is the performance, which can be measured by Google PageSpeed score, as an example. It is a category page, 49 for mobile, 79 for desktop, and Google Lighthouse report results except for SEO are also average. While the part of the Lighthouse report ratings can be adjusted by proper Magento configuration and optimizing images, the page speed score can be improved by investing in optimization. However, it's hardly possible to have at least 90. Also, it will degrade with the time the new extensions and features are being delivered to the store or the page speed analysis algorithms are updated. It's inevitable because the default Magento 2 frontend framework represented by Luma is becoming more and more deprecated in the world of fastly developing web technologies and approaches. Huva themes. As the Huva themselves say about their product, it's an alternative to the headless storefronts that is much easier and cheaper to implement. Huva is being positioned as just one of themes for Magento, but unlike all the traditional themes, it has the Magento frontend completely reimagined. It builds it from scratch in a brand new way rather than just inheriting the legacy approaches. So we can call it a theme technically, but in fact it's a new frontend. What's the difference? The Hoover developers use the best approaches of Luma, like the traditional layout and template system that is well known among the Magento developers and provides extensibility, and replaced the worst ones. So JavaScript frameworks and libraries like jQuery, Require.js, and Knockout.js are trashed in favor of Alpine.js, and the last CSS is replaced by the Tailwind CSS framework. That provides better development experience for front-end developers due to more modern tools used, and I heard lots of positive feedbacks from them. However, need to keep in mind that any tool is just a tool, and any tool can bring its benefit only when used as intended and following all the best practices. All these changes make it more modern, which means much simpler to customize and more performant. Another point is that Hoover requires front-end developers experience with both Magento and Alpine.js, or Vue.js, which is very similar, which might be not easy to find compared to the alternatives overviewed in the presentation. Also, Hoover provides a possibility to choose a checkout page frontend, use default Luma or any custom or Hoover checkout. The Hoover checkout is built using React.js library. It's not a full value replacement for the default checkout, but provides a base for building your own custom checkout. That should be much easier than doing the same with Luma. Hoover page speed insight gives 100 of 100 possible points performance score for the same category page on mobile and desktop as well. Google Lighthouse report results also look awesome. Besides the performance and being developer friendly, another benefit is that Hoover supports compatibility with numerous popular Magento extensions, which are listed on their GitLab. A side effect is that it becomes much easier to upgrade Magento in Hoover. Hoover cares about compatibility with third-party vendors, and the native Magento front-end related changes do not affect your store anymore. At the moment, the Hoover one-time payment unlimited license that includes support on private Slack and access to third-party compatibility modules costs €1,000. Before we go next, I would like to tell you about front-end architecture types very briefly. The most common one is a traditional architecture or a monolith. In a nutshell, it means that the front-end codebase and back-end codebase are the same and undivided. So, for example, HTML Markdown and PHP scripts often take place in the same files. That's why obviously they can run only together on the same server node. The opposite of the monolith is the headless architecture. This approach implies that the backend and frontend are two totally different applications that communicate with each other via API or middleware. Backend applications stand for storing and processing data, while the frontend displays it to the end user and lets to interact with it. In our case, the backend application is a Magento instance. The next frontend to overview is Vue Storefront. While two previous ones belong to a traditional or a monolith frontend, Vue Storefront is a headless solution that is not dependent on the Magento itself. It's a standalone headless and backend agnostic e-commerce PVA written in Vue.js. Available freely on GitHub, users can also purchase commercial cloud-hosted storefront cloud plans. It supports PVA functionality such as push notifications, full screen views, and home screen access, and an offline mode that ensures that e-commerce stores still function when web connectivity is compromised. Open source features include Slack community access, the PVA storefront application and storefront template, while the subscription-based storefront cloud adds cloud hosting, backups, and other features. Currently, an actual version of Vue Storefront is Vue Storefront 2, which has a wider variety of features and different architecture, but its Magento integration was still beta and not ready for production according to its documentation at the moment of my research. So let's focus on Vue Storefront 1. The general idea for both editions is pretty much the same. The strongest benefit of the Vue Storefront, except the full value PVA, is platform independence. So this way you can upgrade Magento, migrate from Magento 1 to Magento 2, or even change the e-commerce platform without having the front end affected. It is rich due to its architecture. Instead of calling the Magento application directly, it uses Vue Storefront API that responds with the previously indexed data or communicates with the Magento. Magento 2 Vue Indexer provides the data for a NoSQL data pump service, then converts it and proceeds to an Elasticsearch database for the storefront needs. That makes even large catalogs work plain fast, and the front end to be available at least partially, even if the Magento temporary is not. So, to support and customize such an application, it's needed to have a team of Node.js developers for services communicating between Magento 2 and Storefront, and Vue.js developers who will develop the frontend. In an ideal case, it should be a team or agency that is experienced in integrating Vue Storefront with Magento 2, because such a process requires well-coordinated work and communication between the teams and specialists working on very different pieces of a single complex system. Vue Storefront provides paid integrations with a variety of headless CMS, payment services, including Adyen, PayPal, Braintree, Stripe, and search providers. As we can see from the screenshots, despite all the advantages, the Google PageSpeed Insight scores are not high, 55 on mobile and 80 for desktop on a category page. Google Lighthouse report looks more optimistic. Such an application would fit cloud hosting ideally. Userfront provides a paid cloud solution powered by a Google Cloud platform for this purpose. However, single virtual or physical private server should be theoretically enough as well. The last one is a Magento PVA Studio. Magento PVA Studio is a set of development tools to develop, deploy, and maintain a PVA storefront. It includes the Vania theme, a full-value PVA theme built using the PVA Studio. They are being developed and supported by Adobe and Magento community as an open source project. According to the PVA Studio documentation, it's recommended to use Magento Commerce Cloud and special packages developed specifically to deploy and connect your storefront with Adobe Commerce software on the same server. However, it's also possible to install on any other hosting solution as a separate server or on the same one that runs the Magento application. PVA Studio Storefront and Vania theme are built on React.js, but it's also possible to develop a custom frontend using any frontend frameworks and libraries. It has a quite wide and strong community, and also it's not complex to work with for React.js developers. Moreover, unlike Hoova or Luma, it's possible to separate the Magento and storefront teams, so front-end developers are not required to be experienced in Magento at all, which makes it easier to find a team of specialists for your storefront. Since the storefront is a separate application which communicates with the Magento application mainly using GraphQL and REST API, Magento upgrades are not likely to provide backward compatible changes and are expected to be smooth and easy, especially for patch and feature releases. However, if your frontend is based on the Vania theme, updating the PV Studio itself requires manual changes comparison and updating your templates, making sure they are not conflicting. Like Vue Storefront PVA, Google PageSpeed Insight score is quite low compared to Hoova and about the same as Luma, which is 34 for mobile and 78 for desktop. As usual, a category page is used for measurements. Google Lighthouse report gives almost maximal ratings for accessibility, SEO, and best practices scores. Big extension providers like Amnesty provide several extensions for the Magento PV Studio Vania theme. Some other third parties provide GraphQL or Web API for their extensions, making it possible to integrate their functionality into your custom storefront solution. But in general, there are few compatible out-of-the-box extensions on the market. So, it's time to summarize. There are four types of front-end solutions. Luma-based, which is equal to default Magento actually. Traditional Magento monolith. It's custom solutions built upon a Magento application. Headless standalone application, solutions that do not depend on Magento directly, and headless applications created and optimized specifically only for Magento. Luma is still a good option for merchants who would like to save their investments in case when purchasing several third-party extensions and applying a design with a minimal customizations is enough for fulfilling the business goals of the webshop, while page speed scores and similar metrics do not matter too much. Hoova is probably the perfect choice for a total modernization of the default Magento frontend with a more or less traditional development approach while keeping it simple. The Hoova team will care about compatibility with a list of supported third-party extensions, keeping upgrades smooth, and probably the only noticeable disadvantage is the need for Magento frontend developers who are experienced with it. Magento PVA Studio and Vue Storefront are the most obvious, but not the only, solutions for having a mobile-first PVA with Magento. Both of them do their best in making the PVA magic. Vue Storefront is more complicated, but platform agnostic, and may function more efficiently for large stores with significant amounts of products, categories, and stores. The PVA Studio is maintained by the Adobe and Magento community rather than third parties, and was created by Magento specifically. Also, the headless frontends require having a separate team of frontend developers that might be more affordable than Magento-oriented specialists. That's pretty much all. Thank you.